Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Low Code Cafe episode 91. Today we'll continue the series that we started 5 editions ago, which is building a health check system, a health check dashboard that is standalone and communicates remotely with the system monitors. Today we'll continue with seeing how we can turn the dashboard into more actionable dashboards. But before that, let's welcome the new folks to this webinar. So my name is Bogdan Litescu. I'm the founder and CEO of Plant an App. And this event, it's a weekly community event. We get together to announce new capabilities, new features in the platform, showcase various techniques or use cases like we are going to do today. Sometimes we have guest speakers as well from our community. So if you have anything, something interesting to show, we'd appreciate you sharing it with the community, and we'd be glad to host you as well. As you noticed, this event is being recorded. All past editions are on our YouTube channel. We'll post the links in the chat a bit. So make sure to visit, subscribe, and browse, because it's 90 hours of very good training sessions in there. So with that being said, today, the star today will be Dale Warner, our head of support, that will give us some update from the support channels from the trenches segment. And afterwards, he will continue with the system that I mentioned, the dashboards that we started a few editions ago, adding new capabilities. So Dale, I would bring it to you.
Very good. Let me find my place here. All right. So today in From the Trenches, we have a number of hotfixes to version 1.20, and some of them are the request of the community, some of them are bugs, but they're all very good ones. So we've previously released 5. This week there are 6 of them. The first one is that we add a simple save button to the workflow designer. So that means that when you're designing workflow, you can hit save and not have to either back out or test. It's just a quick save button, very simple feature, but I've already been using it today and it's very nice. We have also made a change when you're working with lists that they are now case insensitive, much like the rest of our product. So that will help avoid confusion when you're trying to work with a list if you happen to type the name slightly different case. We had an issue with color picker, and so when you're using the on change, it wasn't working as expected, so we've got that fixed. In our new Bootstrap 5s on the listings, that it was possible for some of those to become corrupted. We found and fixed that problem. So that probably isn't happening for many of you, but for the ones that it did, it was kind of a showstopper. So we've got that working. The ability to add a listing within a listing wasn't working, and we've solved that one. And if you happen to change the title of a module, one of the ones that we generate, it was sometimes confusing our system when you tried to update the entity, so now that's fixed. So all very good hotfixes, and you'll find them in the configuration/updates hotfixes section. Next topic I wanted to talk about is Bootstrap 3, Bootstrap 5. We've just gone through a whole lot of, let's see, hard time hearing. Let me see if is anybody, Patrick, are you able to hear me? I gotta get you to be a panelist. Just want to make sure that, that you can hear me. Make sure I'm on the right mic here.
So yes, Dale, I'm able to hear you.
Okay, good.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so we'll move on Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 5. So as you've been following along, Bootstrap 3 was the way our system was rendering screens for the longest time, and we have upgraded to Bootstrap 5. We've been talking about that quite a bit for the last several months. And Bootstrap 3 will continue to be available for several more versions, but we are eventually going to phase that out. So if you haven't started, it's time for you to begin your conversion journey. And some of this is going to require effort on your part, because in the old model, in the Bootstrap 3 model, we loaded Bootstrap 3 onto the page and then took advantage of it. And going forward, it's the theme's responsibility to load Bootstrap and Bootstrap 5. So if you're using a theme that doesn't load Bootstrap 5, you need to either do some work to figure out how to get it to load, or perhaps buy a theme that has Bootstrap 5 as part of it. And it should avoid loading Bootstrap 3, because 3 and 5 are not compatible. So we will continue to talk more about that, but I just wanted to alert you that that's something that's going on. We invite you to engage in Campfire. This is our community event that we hold on Fridays, and it's more of a conversation than a teaching event, and it's the same hour. Finally, links for this episode, let me post those on the chat. But these are to our YouTube channel and to give us feedback, and so lots of different ways to interact with us. With that, I'm going to move right on to hands-on low coding. There's a lot to cover today, and I'll be talking fast, so listen fast. This is part 5 of a series, and so we're going to be referring back to a few things that we've done in the weeks past, so you might want to go look on our YouTube channel for the earlier parts. But today we're trying to head towards actionable dashboards, and so that's the direction we'll go. And then let's talk about where we're going. We're going to summarize the admin logs in a dashboard. If we get all the way to the end of what we're trying to do today, we'll have the admin logs showing in a dashboard. And so let's just kind of look at that goal a little bit. If we go to any system, and look at admin logs, what you see are each individual error or notation that are made by the system. So whether or not it's a system startup or a general exception, some kind of SQL query, whatever the issue is, it finds its way into the logs. And these then can be hundreds or thousands of records long, and hard to interpret and get a sense of is something going wrong? Is there a new problem cropping up? And so what we're going to do is summarize these to show the log type, like this general exception, and the number of times that happens in a day. And it's going to look something like this when we're done. So it'll show a dashboard card with general exceptions, and there's 3. It'll have a nice icon. It'll have a color, depending on whether or not it's we consider that within normal tolerance levels, or something that should be alerted and called attention to. So this is where we're going to end up. In order to be able to fit all this within an hour, I've done some things in advance, and we'll cover those in a second. But we've added an API to collect the information from the remote system. That's already in place. We'll look at it, but I'm not going to build it today. It's very similar to what we've done in previous episodes. I've also built some entities. So one is going to hold those event summary records that I was just talking about. We're going to go out and query every system once an hour and retrieve the number of those different events for that day. So it'll be a holding for those summaries, not the individual records. We want to be able to provide styling for each different kind of log type. So we'll have some styling. We're going to provide some standard warning levels. And so those will have names and colors, and all that's set up. Once I've reviewed that with you, we'll add some logic so that we can retrieve the event summaries from a remote system and set a warning level. And then finally, we get to the fun part. We'll build a dashboard And we're going to show those event summaries for whatever system that you select that you want to drill down into. So that's where we're going today. Let's take a look at what's already gotten done. So an API to collect data from the remote system, it's called Healthcheck EventSummary. And so if I look at my remote systems, and I've got my APIs going here, we have one called Healthcheck EventSummary. This one that we did here, overall status, that's one that we did in a previous episode. And this follows the same pattern. It's going to return the information that we want. So if we were to take a look at it, we can see it's accepting one parameter, the event date. So whatever date we're interested in, we can pass into it and it'll return all the summaries. And then it has two actions. One is it's going to create a list of things from SQL. And so this SQL, there's a lot of effort or a little bit of development that got done to create that. But what it's doing is it's going out to the event log, the same event log we were just viewing interactively. And it is formatting a date, counting up the number of individual records there are, and is going to return a number of events. And it's going to do that for the date that we ask for. If we were interested, it's probably be worth doing. We could take a look in our SQL console and just see what the SQL does. So if we open up SQL console and put in, instead of a parameter date, we'll put in a real date like today's date. 4th, run the query. And so it shows for this date, there are 5 general exceptions, 1 SQL that got executed, 2 login failures, 1 login success, and 2 super user logins. So that's on this system, campfire.plantanapp.com. So the query returns this data, and so it's going to put that into something called the event log list. We're going to return the event log list as JSON to our caller. And so what this looks like is, if we run save and test, we pass it in a date. I'll pass in yesterday's date, for example. It goes out and gets all of those events, and it does it in JSON. So we go over to our handy JSON viewer here and take a look at what it shows. And so we can see, clean this JSON up to see that it has the event date and then these different keys in it. The application started 3 times, there was login success once, module load exception once, server was updated. So this API then allows us to get that information for whatever date we want to. And so we'll be taking advantage of that. So that's on our remote system. What has also already been completed is a change to our systems listing. So if we go to systems, which we've started building before, I've added a new column, a new property called EventSummary API, and then this EventSummary API that I just did for each system that we're following. So Campfire, we took the URL from that system. This is the call that needs to be made to get that event summary. So that column's been added, and I filled in the data for that. So that's another thing that's been completed. And then I've built these 3 different entities. So one is for the system event summaries. And so let's take a look at that. So we go into our entities, and system events summaries are going to have information like we're going to keep a row. For each row, you're going to have a system, the date that it happened, the key in question, like general exceptions or login success, whatever, and how many times that happened. So we'll be keeping 1 row for each one of those. And then eventually we'll be assigning a warning level. So the warning level, well, we'll cover that in a second. Let's take a look at what this data eventually is going to look like. If we look at the system event summaries, we can see for the Campfire site, general exceptions, number of events, high. So a warning level. So that's the data we're going to collect, and we'll be actually working on the logic to go out and do that. The next thing that's already completed is the warning levels. And this, we can just take a look here. It's an entity that got created that just has a name, a color, and an RGB color. So something that is reported and it's just a statistic that we're going to show, that warning level is going to come in as a gray, and the color I've picked out for that is this RGB color code. And I've got these RGB color codes because this is what we're going to feed into the custom dashboard card mechanism that we're going to use. So a normal thing is going to be green, a warning is going to be yellow, a high alert, a high warning level is going to be red. And I've picked out some colors for this. I'm not the best at picking colors, but I picked them. You can use a tool like an RGB color picker where you can point to something and it'll tell you the color. So I just searched for an RGB color picker, but there's other ones that you can use for getting colors. And so I picked out some colors. All right, and the last one that I've set up in advance is something called the log type key. And so the log type keys is saying for each type of item, like a general exception or a super user, what icon do I want to show? Maybe I don't want to use this ugly word general_exception, so we'll call it general exception. And then we get a chance to define, I've added fields that lets us define the warning level. So for example, a general exception, we might say that the default warning level, warning level is the warning selection. But if it gets above, 10 or higher, we'll call it the high. So this is going to be the data that drives what color things happen. You'll be able to have 3 different colorations, the default, and then if it exceeds one level, and then if it exceeds another level. So we'll be applying that. So let's see. So that's the setup. We have just a lot of places to hold our data, and then we've actually set up colors and go from there. So yeah, last thing that we've set up a couple of tokens. I created a token in here in the TAA date namespace, and this is just a handy token that lets us put in things like month, day, year, and whatever format we want the current date to be returned in will be output. Those are defined here in the different SQL Server formatting. I'm using the format function. So just a handy date function. And then the last one that we've done a setup is the tech dash card. This is contributed by one of our user community. And this dash card accepts things like an on click, this RGB color value, what kind of icon to use, the title, value, subtitle. And just with this one token, then it will actually generate the HTML for a dashboard card. And so we're going to be using this to actually get the dashboard card. Okay, so that's preparation. Let's actually start building something. The first thing that we want to do is to get the Healthcheck EventSummary from the remote system. And so that's going to take, what system do we want to do and what date do we want to do? And it's going to end up creating summary IDs. And so the processing will be that we need to create a log type key if it doesn't exist. We could go through and create all of these log type keys in advance. The problem is that event logs can have things that we don't know about and maybe didn't provide for. So we'll build this list dynamically, and then it'll just be easy to configure them. And to prove that we're going to build it dynamically, I'm going to actually delete these records out. So delete them out, and we'll build this dynamically. And then for every record that we get back from this health check summary, we'll get we'll create a system event summary record. So with that, let's build it. And I'm going to keep my place over here on my left screen. And so this is going to be in the form of a workflow. And so the workflow is going to be, and we're not going to get tied up with namespaces today, we'll accept the default, but the workflow is going to be that this, what we said, we want to get the health check event summary. So you all know I'm a fan of copying and pasting, so we'll do that. So that's what this, the name of this is going to be. And in dealing with inputs and outputs, the first input is going to be an event date. And the next one is going to be the system. So by passing in a system ID and saying that this is a type of system, when we'll have access to all the records in the system, all the properties of the system without having to do actually any work. So to read the record. And then for our processing, what we're going to start right off with going to get the information from the API that we've set up on our remote system. So we will do a server request. And the setup of this is going to be to like to document what these things are doing so it shows up on the title, a little easier to follow. The URL that we're going to call is going to be from our input parameter of system, and we're going to get the event summary API. So that property holds that call to the remote API. And what we need to pass it is not this default information, but we need to pass it an event date. And that is going to be the same as the date that came in from our input. So we'll put some brackets around that. So whatever the call to this item is, we're going to pass the event date. And from an output perspective, we're going to output this to the output token is going to be the event summary JSON. And, you know, I've made up these names in advance, obviously, helps me to get through it. And so this is going to go get our information. So just in the interest of testing along the way, I like to see that things are working. I'm going to add an endpoint here, and we'll add a temporary output. And the output that I'm going to add is this same event summary JSON. So if this call is working, we're going to get the JSON from the remote system. I'm also going to take advantage of some features for default values here so that we can test faster. So we'll take today's date as the default value, and the system that we're going to be testing is, we're going to get the Campfire system, that is ID number 3. So we'll put that in as the default as well. So we save and test. See, we can see our defaults here, so we don't have to type anything. And it did not run. So something didn't work right. And so now we get to debug. So we have the system event date. Put that information in right. Event date is text. The system is a system. All right, Patrick.
I don't think this will solve your error, but maybe in the event, in the server request.
Okay.
In the server request, I just noticed that your your token is.
We're actually, and now that I think about it, the one that we're testing for here, we're going to the Campfire. I'm going to look at this API and just make sure that that the API is set up correctly. And so it needs to allow Healthcheck apps, plantonapp.com. So I just wanted to make sure that it was accepting that. So I'm sorry, your suggestion was to...
Oh, I was just looking at your output token name. It has the square brackets on it, but I don't think that's causing your error.
I think it is.
Yeah. Okay.
And Jeff, who's on the call, is probably enjoying that because he's that when you were outputting a token, it does get confusing.
Oh, and I also noticed that Ben suggested the same thing. Thank you.
You guys are great. So here we go.
And do we know that our URL token is being replaced correctly?
No, I don't know that we do. So let's.
Oh, you know what? You don't have a parameter for that. You have system event summary API, but you don't. Shouldn't you have a which system you're getting the event summary API for?
It's passing in.
Oh, system is I get it. Yep.
System is a type.
Yeah, here is your so it should be coming from your input token. Yep.
All right. So time to slow down and get this right. So I am going to turn this off and simply output that thing to see if we're getting a good URL.
Always good to show troubleshooting steps.
So we're getting a good URL, and Campfire, that's the Healthcheck EventSummary. So this is the point I'm going to cheat. I have it up on another screen here, and I'm going to export it and see if that will work. Maybe we can figure out what went wrong. So it's a server request.
Yes.
Here was the problem. Defaulted to, we didn't pick a method.
Yep.
It's the little stuff that'll get you. So if we save and test this, didn't. Gotta turn it back on. And the output of this thing is event summary JSON. So we'll output it just to show all of our work. That was easy. Pick the method. That's the lesson of that one. Pick the method. And Ben had that answer. He's been screaming at the keyboard. All right. So we now have good JSON and we can move on. we are in the next step. What we want to do is we're going to turn that JSON into we're going to create it as a list. So this is going to be create a list from JSON. And the list is going to let us iterate through that. So the JSON that we want is this same event summary JSON that we've had. And what we're going to create is the event summary list. So now we'll be able to iterate through event summary list and do things with it. So this will, for each record that's returned by that system, we'll be able to iterate through it. So that's that one. So the next, now it's time to actually iterate through the list. And so that is going to be an execute actions. And so we will say execute actions for each list entry. And place that and say, we're going to process this event summary list. And so the list that we're going through is the event summary list. And then the action list is going to be all the different things that it's going to do. So what do we want to do? First, going back to our list of what are we trying to get to, we want to automatically create the log type key if it doesn't exist, and find out what its record number is if it does. And then we're eventually going to create that, store away that summary. So let's start down there. The first, that first one is we're going to do it by way of a run SQL query. And the description of this is we're going to get the log type key if it exists, the ID if it exists, and skip showing a little bit of the work so that we can move on. What we're doing is we're saying we're going to get the ID from our log type key table where it matches up with some name, so general exception or whatever. And so now we will bind this name variable to some value, and the value we're going to do is off of our event summary list. We're iterating through event summary list, and we're going to get log type key, application start login success. We're going to get one of those things as part of the data that we're going through. So we're going to look and see if this thing exists in the data. And if it does, it's going to store its value in the log type key ID. And now we so if it exists, log type key is going to be set to the ID of the record. If it doesn't exist, we want to create a new log type key record. And so this is going to be create the record. If it's not found, create the record. And so the condition as to whether or not it's found is the log type key blank. If the log type key is blank, we need to create the record. And so the record is going to get created as this, the log type key that came in from our JSON. We're just going to default everything to a font icon exclamation. The title of the thing, because we don't know how to lowercase it or how to make it look nice, we'll just default it to the same thing as its name, but we'll be able to override that once it's created. And then we'll set the default warning level to 1. So every new thing that gets created, it's just going to have a default warning level of 1, which is our normal record. The output token of this is going to be our log type key ID. So because when a record gets created, that's the ID of the key. So either way, if it creates new, we're going to have a log type key. If it finds it by a result of this SQL, we're going to have a log type key. So either way, we're going to get a log type key created. And so I'm going to save that action. So this one is, it's not complete, but again, I like to test along the way. So we'll see if this thing is working. If we, what we're doing is working on log type keys, and for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to delete all these out so we can see whether or not it's working. So when we save and test this against this date, this system, it retrieves back a bunch of stuff. And if we now look at our log type keys, it sees that it's created them with the exclamation, and it's got all of our information. If we run it again, it should just update those, that we don't have duplicates. So it's updating, or not, excuse me, it's not updating, it's getting the record ID. So either way, we're just want to make sure we're not double creating. Okay. And so this has gotten us through the first part where we have created the log type key if it doesn't exist. So now we want to create the system event summary record. We will do that, and that's just going to be a couple of more steps, very similar to the first ones. So we will go into our process summary and just keep adding them here. So the first one is that we're going to run a SQL query. We've got to figure out if this exists or not. And so the SQL query is that we're going to find the system summary ID if it exists. The select, and you guys can work through this after class, but the select is that we're looking at the system event summary, and we're going to say if the system equals the one I've got, and the log type key is the one I've got, and the event date is the one I've got, then this is the record, and we're going to update it, not create it. And so now we can bind these tokens. So we have a system, we have a log type key, and an event date, and we need to bind them to the right information so that the SQL query can run. So the system that we want is the system that came in from our input, the ID for the system that came in from the input. The log type key is the one that we just came up with up here, log type key ID. So we want to see if that one exists. Key ID, and the event date is the one that comes from our input also. So we're just checking to see if this record exists. If it does, it's going to store it in a column in a property called system event summary ID, and that's it. So this one is going to help us find whether or not it exists. And then we're going to take one of two tacks. We're either going to partially update if it's found. So let's do that one first. To partially update the system event summary. And so our comment is found update. The ID we want to do, or excuse me, the condition is if this ID that we just came up with is blank, not blank. If it's not blank, we're going to update. Put things in the right spot. So that's our condition. We're only going to do this if the ID is not blank. The ID that we want to do is that same ID. So say update that ID, and the only thing we're going to update is number of events, and the number of events is what's coming from our JSON, this list that we're iterating through. Number of events. So if there's an update, it's just going to update the number of events. And so that's if it's found. If it's not found, we want to create a record. So this is going to be to create a new system event summary. And so this is the opposite condition where the system event summary is blank. We didn't get that in our read when we did the SQL, so now we got to fill in the blanks. The system that's going to be created is the system ID. We're going to use the same event date from our input. We're going to use the log type key that we either looked up or created in that previous step. And then we're going to use the same number of events. We're not going to set the warning level. We're just going to create this record. And from an output token, I am going to create it as a system event summary ID, just so we can show that it did some work. If we wanted to do something with it, we're not actually going to do something with it. So we can now, remember a little while ago, these log type keys were created. Now are these system event summaries, which there we have some here. So we'll delete these out just to show that this thing is working. And so when this runs, it's going to pull that information from the remote system and populate it. Same date, same system. Take a look now and see that we have, from the Campfire system, we have these general exceptions and these logins and whatever. If we were to run it again, it's going to do a bunch of updating and we shouldn't see any changes. If we were to run it with a different system, for example, we could get it from our community site, which is site number 1. So we can override this to get same date, but site 1. And so we got exceptions from that one. So now we've got some nice test data in our system event summaries. So we have different events from different systems, but all coming together and all nicely summarized. Now we need to establish a warning level before we can do some dash cards. So that's where we are. We've finished that one. And so we'll move on to the setting these health check summary warning level. This will be a new workflow, but we'll just create the workflow and then call it. Notice our new save button here. We can save and it just saves. We won't actually go back and create a new workflow. And it's the set the warning level workflow. On this one, we're going to start, our inputs are going to be that we want the event summary. So input is going to be called summary. And this is of a type that is a system event summary. So every time we get an event summary that we want to get a warning level applied to, we'll just call this pass the event summary and it's going to do the work for us. We're not going to provide any default value for this one. The information that we're going to need to do the warning level is going to come from this log type key. So we're going to have to read this and so that we get access to what the default is and these other numbers. So that'll be our first step. We will read the log type key. The key that we want is the one that's coming from our event summary log type key. So that's from our input, the log type key. So whatever one is being passed in, that's what we're going to go read. And we're going to store that in an output token called log type key so that we can just easily access. So we're going to the idea is that we're always going to provide the default, and then if it gets above event 1, we're going to apply warning level 1, and if it gets above event 2, the number of events, then it's going to apply warning level 2. So the first thing we're going to do is create a default. So this is going to be to create an updated token that's going to say that we're going to default the new warning level. The new warning level is our token that we're creating, and we're going to get it from the log type key that we just read and get the default warning level. So at the conclusion of this, it'll have the default. And then the next thing we want to do is to apply the events 1. Right? There's this events 1. Well, let's set up a little bit of data. So let's just say that if there's any, we want to consider that a warning. If it's above 10, we want to consider it to be high. And so this is the logic that we're applying. So the default is going to be warning. If it gets above 10, it's going to be high. So this is the logic that we're adding. So this is also going to be a creator update token. And this one is kind of interesting, how to, the condition that we're going to do. And I'll just copy and paste. We're saying if the number of events from this particular record is greater than events 1 from our log type key, and there is a warning level associated with that warning level 1. If it's undefined, we're not going to do this thing. We'll just accept the default. But if they've actually defined a warning level, then this is what we're going to apply. So the new warning level becomes warning level 1. So that does that. And actually a little better title for this would be create or apply the warning, apply the warning level 1. We can, because warning level 2 is almost the same thing, we can export that and import it back in, and we'll just modify it a little bit. So now we can say that we are doing events 2 warning level 2, and if the number of events is greater than events 2 and warning level 2 is provided, then we're going to apply warning level 2. It'll link that in. And the last thing is that we want to update our event summary. So we will do a update our event summary. The one that we want to do is the one that got passed in the first place. So it's the event summary ID that was passed in. And what we're going to update is the warning level. And it's going to get this variable that we've been building up, the new warning level. And so we'll save that and end. So let's see, we'll save to make sure nothing gets lost. And so now we can take a look at one of these. We'll look at a general exception because we've provided a nice definition for it. If it's under 10, it's going to be a warning. If it's above 10, it'll be high. And so if we look at our summaries and find a general exception, here's a nice one, 61. The ID for that is number 22. So we'll process on number 22 to do our test. And so we put in a 22 and see what it did. So now when we look at number 22 and refresh, it shows that the warning level associated with this is high. Okay. For the purposes of fast forwarding a little bit, well, no, we can't fast forward, got to do the work. So this new set health check event summary warning needs to be executed on every one when we get the summaries. So we'll edit this. In our processing, we'll add the step. We're going to, again, what comes out of this is an event summary ID, system event summary ID. And so we will add and execute. And somehow I've managed to get 2 of them. So now I'm going to have to slow down and get it right. I'm going to double check that this has everything we need. And so I am going to delete 1. I don't know how I got 2 by the same name. I suspect it's something with our new save button, something to make a note of and test. So every time we get a new event summary, the item that we want to process is this one. System event summary ID. And so we will just pass that as a token. Every time we get an update, that'll process. And now let's run this against our test data. We have our system 3, and we'll also run it against system 1. And so when we look at our data, these should all be at our reported or normal, whatever the warning level we've now assigned a warning level. Okay. We've got 7 minutes. It's going to take 15. So I'm just warning you in advance. We might go over a little bit. If you can't stick around, it'll be on the tail end of the recording when it gets posted to YouTube. So finally, we get to the good part. Let's build the dashboard. So we will quit with this and go to pages, and we're going to add to our, it's going to appear under our at a glance page. So we will add an at a glance. Let's find it here. We'll go to our at a glance page and add a new page. This is going to be dashboard. See it. And just our developers can edit it. So then page, and we'll go to that page. So the idea is that we'll be navigating to this page from our at a glance, and we're going to want to do it based on what system that they want to look at. So we'll go to our at a glance and add a button to say that we want to look at the event summary. So we'll add an item button. This is going to be the event button. And when it's clicked, we want to redirect. Oops, I'm going to do it by page. Redirect the page, and we're going to go to the event summary dashboard. I think this is the right one. And we want to pass it some parameters. We want to pass it the system. So we'll say system equals ID of this we look at our data fields, it's the ID here, so that's what we'll be passing. And we're also going to want to pass that we want the current date, so we can say date equals, and I'm going to use our PAA date formatter to pick a date. So that's the one that I added in tokens. And so the format for that is something like that. And the format I want is year, month, day. So we can test and see if this gets us where we want to go. So we now have an event summary button. We click on the one for Campfire, which is system 3, and it takes us to event summary dashboard, system, okay, 10707, that's not right, but the date came out right. So we'll go back and fix that, make sure we get the right one. And event summary button, full page. I'm not going to use the URL provider system. Might just be. Might be system is what I need. Let's take a refresh. I'm going to take a chance that's the one it needs. Let's see if it gets us the right answer now. Yeah, so now we have system 3 event date. So now we have our link to this data. So now we can very quickly put together a dashboard. This is going to be an action grid. First, we'll set up the data, then we're going to filter, add some fields. The data source is going to be from our system event summaries. And we're not going to worry about sorting it, but from a where clause, we want only the system that was passed in. So we're going to do system event date, and then we'll bind these parameters. This is going to come from the command line. We're going to get the system. We'll provide a default so that the SQL doesn't come out. And we will should have set do not disturb half an hour ago. And in the same way, we'll use the get of the event date, and we'll provide a default. So the SQL doesn't error out. And save. So now it's time to pick the fields. We got a lot of fields to pick from, but let's just start by picking a lot. The key, the number of events, the warning level, what the system was. We don't need the creation. The icon code, the title, and then from our color, which is related, that's from the warning level, we'll pick the warning color name just so we can see it. And let's add those and see what it looks like. So save it. And this is the summary dashboard. And this page is, we're seeing an error has occurred. This is a Bootstrap 5 problem. So we will go into the page settings and make sure we're set to Bootstrap 5. It was not, so let's change that. So now we have all the information that we're going to need. We got the date, the number of events for system 3. There's 7 of this that are general exception, the yellow, the color. And so now we can implement the dashboard card. Contribution by Ben. So if we look at the custom dash cards by Ben, it's going to show us the exact format and the things we're going to need. One of the things that we need was the token, which I've already set up. We need some CSS. So I'm going to grab the CSS and put it where it needs to go. We'll open this up and this goes on our page in the UI settings. So that's some helper configures that dash card. And then the last thing we need is this sample of how to use it, because we're going to build a column in our grid that has the dash card. So we edit the dashboard and add a computed field that's going to be the dash card. And we use that template and we're going to fill in the blanks. So the first blank we want to fill in is what's the right color to use. And that's going to be this WarningLevel RGB color. Now, when I click on it, it'll go to the end. And so I can cut it and paste it where it needs to go. So we'll fill in this blank. The icon code that we want. A little hard to spot, so I'm going to use the search to pull it out. And it will go here. The title we want is this one, title. The value is going to be the number of events. And the subtitle is going to be this warning level name. All right, let's see how that comes out. We're going to allow the HTML so that it'll render. Say refresh. So now we get a card for everything. So a general exception gets yellow, all these different ones, shows the numbers. And so now we just need the dash cards, and we don't need all this extra data that is displaying. So we'll do a little cleanup on this, and we'll call it done. So all this extra data that's not the dash card, we will remove from the listing. And we will save that. And in views, we'll turn this into, instead of a table, we'll turn it into cards. And the description field will be dash card. Boom. We can clean that up a little bit, but it shows everything that was retrieved from the system. So now the impact is going to be, when you're looking at a system, you'll be able to click into the system, into the event summary, and see the dash cards that for that system. You'll be able to color them and control how they're colored based on the number of events. Okay, we went to way over time today. There's some cleanup that we could do with that, which would be to add some automation to get more systems, get data from all the different systems. You need to think about deleting out all the data for example, you might want to hold on to data for 3 months or 6 months or a year, but you don't want to just let it build indefinitely. But since we're getting summaries, it's not going to be that much data. I appreciate those of you who hung around with me, and hope that this was useful to you. And that concludes Low Code Cafe for today. We will see you next week.